Panigale V4 does right. Everything. See you next week. What, I gotta spell it out for you? Okay, fine. Let's talk about what is arguably the hottest bike out right now. In typical fashion, I'm gonna have to provide you with a little background first. The Panigale V4 is packing a V4 engine in 2 different displacements depending on the trim level. The fact that this bike is running a V4 is so important this time around that it's actually included in the title of the bike. I know that the world was more or less shaken when Ducati had decided that its flagship Superbike wasn't gonna be running one of their tried and true L-twin engines. But the fact is, Ducati isn't actually a one-trick pony with regards to engines. They've actually been running a V4 since 2002, which is a year that's getting uncomfortably far away if you ask me. Hell, Ducati had experimented with the V4 engine as far back as 1961, when Ducati had begun playing with the idea of, undercutting the American cruiser market with a cruiser-style bike equipped with a 1257cc V4 engine that produced 100 horsepower. And thus, the Ducati Apollo was born, and then immediately killed. Yeah, but let's get back to the more important stuff. Like I said, 2002 had marked the first year of a modern V4 powered Ducati in the form of the Ducati Desmosedici, made specifically for the new MotoGP rules for 2002. Now this is something that I'm sure all of the MotoGP guys and the Ducati guys know, but I'm not too sure if this is common knowledge for everyone else, so let me just give you a rundown. In 2002, the rules for MotoGP had changed, which made it viable for Ducati to return to Grand Prix racing, which they had been absent from for decades at this point. Essentially, 2-stroke race bikes were being phased out for 4 strokes, which is something that Ducati is much more familiar with. So as always, in comparison to 4-cylinder and above bikes, twins will have to be given some sort of advantage. See, in Superbike, that advantage was a much higher ceiling when it came to displacement, but in MotoGP, the advantage would be a much lower minimum weight requirement, thus giving the bike an advantage in handling. Back in 2002, twin-cylinder bikes could weigh just a smidge under 300 pounds, while the rest had to weigh in at 320 pounds and above. This was something to consider for Ducati, but they quickly decided against it because in order to make at the very least 230 horsepower out of a Desmodromic L-twin with, lightweight racing internals sacrificing some strength for weight, they would have to create an engine that was capable of running at over 17,000 RPM, which is certainly possible, but the stroke would have to be Formula 1 short and the bore would have to be as wide as a bucket, which ironically didn't sound reliable enough for Ducati. So what they essentially did was ask the question of what would happen if we just combined 2 of our signature L-twins side by side, each with half of the displacement of one big V-twin, effectively making a double L-twin with 2 cylinders stroking together in each bank. They put this twin post concept into motion and labeled the setup the Desmosedici, which is a shortened term in Italian that translates to Desmodromic distribution with 16 valves. Now, I mentioned the rule changes in 2002, but the announcement was actually made in 2001 for the 2002 season, which gave Ducati quite some time to react to the change, allowing them to reveal the bike in 2002 for the 2003 season.
So 2003?
Yeah, 2003 on this bike. Obviously it was Ducati's first season back in MotoGP. And I mean, they made a hell of a good job of it.
Yeah.
Winning your 4th race, they had a generally good season and it's a hell of a good bike. The sharp nose Kokinski Kajiva for me was always, one of the best looking bikes.
Yeah.
And this is there's definitely similarities between the two and it goes like, you wouldn't believe the noise. The noise at 17,000 RPM is just unreal.
So every season Ducati labels the bike according to the year of the GP season. So the bike that competed in the first 2003 season was the Desmosedici GP3, and in 2004 it was the GP4, and so on, all the way to the GP18 and the GP19 of right now. But here's the more interesting part. Ducati actually sold a limited but road legal version of the Desmosedici starting in 2006 in the form of the Desmosedici RR, often cited as the first true racing replica of a MotoGP bike. The price of this thing certainly reflected it, with the retail price of $72,000 in 2006, which translates to about $92,000 today. Even though you ordered your bike in 2006, you had to wait until 2008 to get it, and you were super exclusive as Ducati only made 1,500 of these things for public purchase. But what you got was a badass bike that essentially was the precursor to the modern Panigale V4. You got that same MotoGP-derived Desmodromic V4 engine, albeit, tamed a little bit for the street with just about 200 horsepower at the crank in stock form, which is easily exceeded through racing modifications that were provided to buyers personally by Ducati. The bike was truly extraordinary, and it had sown the seeds for a road-going V4 powered Ducati. I actually briefly mentioned the reason why Ducati had switched to the V4 in its flagship bike at the end of that video dedicated to the Honda RC51. Essentially, when it came to the Superbike class, technology and advancements in engineering had clearly begun to eclipse the displacement advantage that Ducati had when it came to the championship. For the longest time, Ducati had dominated because of a rule which gave V-twins a 250cc advantage over inline fours during a time where that gap was ultimately unclosable through other means, which ultimately led to Japanese manufacturers creating V-twins of their own to compete with the 1000cc bikes during a short period of time before Superbike changed the rules again. This time around though, inline 4 powered bikes were allowed to run with 1000cc's, while twins were allowed to run up to 1200cc's. If you want to know more about that era prior to the cc bump to 1000 and 1200, go check out that RC51 video if you haven't, as it's basically centered all around the 750 and 1000cc era. I highly recommend it for some full context rather than a short summary. So after the controversy of the 90s and early 2000s, this CC bump kept things competitive for everyone, as you can see by the tournament standings by year. Ducati was back and forth with other manufacturers up until 2011, and after that, they hadn't been doing so great. In fact, they never took a top spot since then. This was a huge driving factor for Ducati to run a 4-cylinder bike, not only in MotoGP, but now in the Superbike segment. Now, the reason why it's so important to consider the MotoGP roots of Ducati's modern V4 power plant is because the Panigale's power plant is directly related to that of the Desmosedici, which is what gives the bike its insane amount of trackability. The Panigale V4 is essentially available in 4 trim levels. The base model Panigale, which despite the label of being a base model is actually quite an amazing bike, as it includes fully adjustable sacks and Showa suspension and steering damper, that crazy Ducati inertial sensor unit thingy that basically knows what the bike is doing at all times, the typical rider mode controls, top of the line Brembo brakes, and all of that engineering goodness of a flagship Ducati, along with 214 crank horsepower from its 1100cc engine. The V4S features mainly upgrades to handling and weight with Öhlins dampers and suspension all around, forged aluminum wheels, a lighter battery, and a magnesium front subframe. The V4S also has the same 214 crank horsepower and 1100cc's of displacement. The V4 Speciale is a super limited run of the V4S, which fully embraces the racetrack potential of the bike. So it includes all of the goodies of the V4S, but also includes different carbon fiber pieces around the bike to further decrease the weight, a special seat, grips, foot pegs, levers, brake system, and tank cap. The bike also includes some parts supplied on the side should the buyer plan to use this as a track bike completely. It has a racing screen, a fender delete kit, a cover, a racing computer, mirror mount plugs, and last but not least, a full titanium Akrapovic exhaust specifically made for this bike that drives a power up from 214 horses to 226 at 13,000 RPM. Then there's a top-of-the-line model that has an ironically smaller engine than all of its siblings that I just listed. It's the model that demonstrates my point about how technology has eclipsed displacement, and it's an example that's literally within the same company and line of bikes. And that bike is none other than the Ducati Panigale V4R. And yes, the other bikes have 1,103 cc's, while the V4R has 998. It's a 105cc deficit, but that's because the V4R is a homologation special by Ducati for the World Superbike League. Because remember, Ducati isn't allowed to run a V4 with more than 1000cc's of displacement in the league. The 1199 Panigale of a few years ago was allowed 1200cc's as a V-twin, but the Panigale is now a 4-cylinder bike. The V4, the V4S, and the V4 Speciale are purely road bikes, while the bikes that will be running SBK will be the Ducati V4Rs, as they fit the 1000cc limit. The V4R is more set up for racing as a flagship race bike, and due to its smaller displacement, it revs higher than the 1100s, and it makes its peak power of 221 horses at 15,250 RPM, which is over 2,000 RPM more than the 1100s. Naturally though, it weighs a little bit less, and it's also down on torque in comparison with 83 pounds-feet versus 92. But still, if that's not enough, you can also add the Akrapovic exhaust to the V4R, which will boost it up to 234 horsepower. Which is fucking nuts, but okay. Now, I'm no Ducati guy, but I've always admired just how much passion they put into their bikes. Cause, you know, like with the V4R, not only can you truly see just how much they tried to fix a problem that they were having with racing, but you can see just how much they strive to be the absolute best. Ducati had always stuck with its L-twin lifestyle, but when they realized that it was no longer viable to do so, they didn't just adapt, they also innovated. They reluctantly joined the 4-cylinder lifestyle, but they did so in their own way. This bike has plenty of engineering goodies like that famed counter-rotating crankshaft for smoothness and handling, and even in the way it sounds, it still echoes of a Ducati. So for example, when you listen to one of these bikes, it honestly doesn't really sound like what you think a V4 would really sound like. It honestly sounds like a really cracked out high-revving L-twin, which is all part of that over-square twin-pulse configuration. So you get a Ducati noise, but out of a 4-cylinder, which is pretty cool if you ask me. Once again, the V4R with that Akrapovic exhaust it comes with produces 234 horsepower at over 15,000 RPM. And this is all motor, mind you. That makes this bike 3 horsepower faster than the famed H2 with its supercharger. And granted, 3 horses ain't much, so honestly, even if you want to call it a wash, it's still impressive that they are even matched like that. And plus, the V4R would outhandle the H2 any day of the week. Granted, the V4R probably sucks ass as a road bike compared to the H2. But unlike the H2, the V4 is actually quite a handsome bike in all of its trims. Now, I'll admit that when it first came out, I wasn't the hugest fan of the design of the headlight when compared to the old Panigale, because it kind of reminded me of the Arbiter from Halo. I'm not the hugest fan of the V4R, as I think it's a bit overstyled in the name of aerodynamics with all those wings and fins and cuts, as well as that wider front fairing than normal. I don't really even dig that 2-color tank, it looks kind of weird. I mean, this is all in the name of performance, so it makes sense, but I much more prefer the 1100 bikes with the tricolor option or the Corsair option. I just think they maintain the super smooth lines of the fairing, but they accentuate them with tasteful graphics as opposed to just carving out new lines and holes and whatnot. Either way, man, I'd love to take any of these bikes out. You all know the video that I made a while ago, the problem with Japanese bikes, where I give my take on the blandness of the Japanese motorcycle market compared to the 1970s up through the 1990s. Well, I still feel all these things that I outlined in the video. The Panigale V4 excites me because even though it's not a Japanese bike, it has enough potential to shake the box and get Japan to get really crazy again. You know, this bike alongside with the S1000 that just came out. The V4 doesn't excite me in the sense that I can aspire to own one or anything, but it excites me because perhaps Ducati can help kickstart more bonkers balls out shit like this. You know, putting in maximum effort and passion into bikes. I don't really know if Ducati can dethrone Kawasaki in the coming years, but even as someone who has always been on Team Japan, I honestly hope that they can. Because after creating a masterpiece like this, they kind of deserve it. Thanks for watching.